When I'm working with clinicians who are about to embark on work with young children and their families, they're often very daunted. Um, and they have to do this sort of mental calculus about how do we translate what we know about ACT into these little bite-sized nuggets that we can then deliver to little kids and their families. And I'm talking about kids who are as young as 4 and as old as about 9 years old. And so let me start by saying that it is really, really fun to work with younger children, and ACT affords an incredible array of tools that you can use that are experiential for young children and for their parents, um, in a way that is, I think, just incredibly effective. And so, one of the things that's really important to understand is that little kids learn experientially. They learn through play. They don't learn through talking. And so that's one of the first points of sort of difficulty that clinicians who are newer to working with young kids find. Oh my gosh, how do I teach them? You're not going to teach them. What you're going to do is you're going to play with them. And in the context of those playful interactions, you are going to shape up and sh when I say shape, I mean in the behavioral sense of shaping, where we're going to build a repertoire or several repertoires of behavior that will culminate in psychological flexibility. And we're going to do this one little step at a time. We're going to reinforce every effort, right, that little kids make, every try, every um, thing that they do along those lines. So, to give you an example of this, let's talk about the DNAV model, the very beautiful developmental model of ACT that was designed by Louise Hayes and Joseph Cherokee in Australia. This model really lends itself to shaping psychological flexibility in young children and doing this in ways that are really bite-sized and really easily accessible. So let's start with teaching kids about their noticing perspective. What is the noticer? What is that? What does that even mean? Well, I hate to tell you this, but little kids are way better at this than we older people are. They're already doing it all the time. And so it's less about teaching little kids how to do this than helping clinicians or us as clinicians learning how to dip into this space with little kids. And if you've ever seen a little child play in a sandbox or build a sand castle, think about how that happens. They don't have rules about a sandcastle in their head. Maybe they have an idea, but they don't have a manual where they're going to sit there and go, okay, now take the sand and add the amount of water. And should I measure that? No, they go, they grab a bucket, they run down to the ocean, they get their water and they get their sand. And eventually they learn what's the right proportion of water to sand to make sure that if you want a drippy looking castle, you can have one. If it's too drippy, it's going to collapse. And if you have the right amount of water, it's going to stand and it's going to keep the shape of that bucket. And isn't that cool? Right? So, one thing that is important that little kids are not so good at, and neither are adults, by the way, is discriminating when they are in their noticing space versus when they're in their, say, advising space. And if you're new to ACT or new to this model, when we say the advising space or the advising perspective, we mean in your mind, in your thoughts, the thinky part of you, right? So you have your imagined sandcastle in your head, and there you are building your sandcastle, and you're feeling the grains of sand in your hand, and there's probably sand in your bathing suit, and it's uncomfortable, but it's exciting, and maybe you're a little hot, and you're feeling all the world through your five senses. Meanwhile, there's a voice in your head going, but that's not as good as Bobby's sandcastle. And it's not as good as the sandcastle I'm imagining. This is a crappy sandcastle, and why can't I do it? Right? That's one's advisor. And the job of the advisor is to keep us safe, and it's also to give us guidance for how to do things right so we can move in the world in successful ways, right? It's a threat detector. And sometimes it's an incredibly useful tool. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it beats us down. So, one of the things we might do is help kids start to notice where they are, right, when they're speaking. Like, for example, if they say, I don't like this sandcastle, it's not very good, you might say, are you speaking from your noticer or your advisor? Or who's speaking, your noticer or your advisor? And if they're saying, wow, the sand's all over my hands, you might ask the same question, right? And all we're doing is discrimination training. What perspective am I taking? Am I taking the perspective of my five senses and noticing the world in that way? Or am I taking the perspective from my advising perspective and noticing the world in that way from my thoughts? Um, and when you do this, a number of things happen, right? Number one is choice shows up. Ooh, I can choose. I can choose which one is useful. And you're really shaping flexibility right then and there as you go.